The harsh wind whistled through the empty streets of Copper Creek as Cassidy Porter pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching tumbleweeds dance across the dusty road. It was 1875, and the once thriving mining town was slowly dying, much like her hopes for a better future. At 22, she had already endured more hardship than most women twice her age, but tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was the spring social, the one event that might bring a smile to her weary face. Cassidy stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her small rented room above the seamstress shop. Her chestnut hair was neatly pinned, and she had managed to mend her mother's old blue dress, the only fine garment she owned. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the lace collar, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her stomach. It had been 2 days since she'd had anything more substantial than tea and a few stale crackers. Just get through tonight, she whispered to herself. Just one night of happiness. The social hall was transformed with paper lanterns and wildflowers, the humble decorations doing their best to disguise the weathered walls. A small band played in the corner, a fiddle, banjo, and harmonica, creating melodies that transported the townsfolk away from their daily struggles. Cassidy lingered by the entrance, suddenly self-conscious about her worn shoes and mended dress. "Miss Porter, you came." Mrs. Henderson, the baker's wife, approached with a warm smile. "I was beginning to think we wouldn't see you tonight." "I wouldn't miss it," Cassidy replied, forcing brightness into her voice. "It looks wonderful in here. Well, there's punch over yonder, and plenty of fine gentlemen looking for a dance partner." Mrs. Henderson winked before hurrying off to greet more arrivals. Cassidy moved toward the refreshment table, hoping to find something to quiet her growling stomach. The spread was modest: some cookies, fruit, and small sandwiches, but to her hungry eyes, it looked like a feast. She hesitated, not wanting to appear greedy, and instead took only a small cup of punch. From across the room, Ethan Abernathy watched the slender young woman in the blue dress. At 26, the ranch foreman had little time for social gatherings, but his boss had insisted the entire crew attend to show support for the community. Ethan adjusted his clean shirt, feeling out of place without his usual dusty work clothes and wide-brimmed hat. "That's Cassidy Porter," his friend Thomas said, following Ethan's gaze. "Came here about a year ago after her parents died. Works for Mrs. Miller at the seamstress shop. Keeps to herself mostly." Ethan nodded, intrigued by the quiet dignity she carried. Unlike the other young women who giggled and flirted openly with the cowboys and miners, Miss Porter seemed content to observe the festivities from the sidelines, occasionally smiling at the children who danced around the floor. "Pretty little thing," Thomas continued, "but not much to her name, from what I hear." "Since when does that matter?" Ethan asked, his eyes still on Cassidy. Thomas chuckled. "It doesn't to me, but I thought your mother was keen on you finding a suitable match from back east." Ethan frowned. His mother's letters were indeed full of not-so-subtle hints about eligible daughters of her friends, but that was the last thing on his mind. Running the double R ranch left little time for courting, and the few social events he attended usually ended with him discussing cattle prices or water rights. The fiddle struck up a lively tune, and couples formed for a Virginia reel. Ethan watched as Cassidy declined an invitation to dance from the banker's son, her face apologetic but firm. Something about her reserved demeanor touched him. She seemed both part of the community and apart from it, much like himself. Before he could reconsider, Ethan found himself crossing the room. His boots echoed on the wooden floor as the music shifted to a slower waltz. "Miss Porter," he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "I'm Ethan Abernathy, foreman at the Double R. Would you care to dance?" Cassidy looked up, surprised. She recognized him. Of course, everyone knew the capable young foreman who had turned the struggling Double R into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. His reputation for fair dealing and hard work preceded him, though she had only seen him from afar when he occasionally rode through town. "I thank you, Mr. Abernathy, but I'm not much of a dancer," she replied, though the truth was she felt too light-headed to attempt it. "Neither am I," he admitted with a smile that transformed his serious face. "But I reckon we could manage to shuffle around without causing too much damage." His easy manner and the genuine warmth in his hazel eyes made her reconsider. It was just one dance, after all. "Very well," she said, placing her empty punch cup on the table. Ethan led her to the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her hand with the other. Cassidy tried to focus on her steps, but the room seemed to tilt slightly, and the music sounded farther away than it should. "Are you all right, Miss Porter?" Ethan asked, noticing how pale she had become. "Yes, just a bit warm," she managed, though in truth she felt anything but warm. A chill had settled into her bones despite the crowded room. They continued to dance, and Ethan found himself enchanted by her quiet grace. Unlike other women who chattered endlessly, Cassidy seemed comfortable with silence, though he sensed it wasn't entirely by choice. "Have you lived in Copper Creek long?" he asked, guiding her through a turn. "Just over a year," she replied. "After my parents died of the fever back in Missouri, I came west. Mrs. Miller was kind enough to offer me work and a small room." "I'm sorry about your parents," Ethan said sincerely. "I lost my father 3 years ago. It's not an easy thing." Cassidy nodded, appreciating that he didn't offer empty platitudes. The room was spinning more noticeably now, and she stumbled slightly. "Miss Porter," Ethan's voice sounded far away. She tried to respond, but her vision tunneled to a narrow point, and then everything went black. Ethan reacted instantly, catching Cassidy before she hit the floor. The music screeched to a halt as dancers stopped to stare. "Give her some air," he commanded, lifting her slight form into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, he realized with concern. Mrs. Henderson rushed forward. "What happened?" "She fainted. I'm taking her outside for some fresh air," Ethan said, already striding toward the door. The cool night air hit them as Ethan carried Cassidy to a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. Her face was alarmingly pale in the moonlight, her breathing shallow. "Miss Porter?" "Cassidy," he called softly, patting her cheek. Her eyelids fluttered, and she looked up in confusion. "Mr. Abernathy?" "You fainted," he explained, still supporting her shoulders. "When did you last eat?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. Yesterday, or perhaps the day before," she admitted reluctantly. Ethan's jaw tightened. Without a word, he gently settled her on the bench. "Wait here." He returned to the social hall, ignoring the curious stares as he strode to the refreshment table. He grabbed a napkin and filled it with bread, cheese, and apple slices, then took a cup of water before returning outside. Cassidy had managed to sit up, mortification coloring her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, don't apologize," Ethan interrupted, sitting beside her and offering the napkin bundle. "Please eat." She hesitated, pride warring with hunger. "Please," he repeated more gently. "I won't tell anyone." With trembling hands, she took a piece of bread and bit into it, closing her eyes momentarily at the simple pleasure of food. "Slowly now," Ethan cautioned, offering the water. "Too much at once will make you sick." They sat in silence as Cassidy ate small bites, gradually regaining her color. Ethan watched the stars appear above them, giving her privacy while staying close enough to assist if needed. "Why didn't you tell someone you were hungry?" he finally asked. Cassidy stared at her hands. "Pride, I suppose. And there are families with children who need help more than I do." "That's admirable, but you can't help others if you're not taking care of yourself," Ethan pointed out. She smiled faintly. "My father used to say something similar." After a pause, she continued, "Work has been scarce lately. Mrs. Miller does her best, but with the mine closing and so many families leaving." Ethan nodded. The economic downturn had affected everyone in the region. The ranch is looking for someone to help with mending and sewing. The Cowboys are terrible at patching their own clothes. It's not much, but it would include meals. Cassidy looked up, surprised by the offer. "I wouldn't want charity, Mr. Abernathy." "It's not charity, it's work we need done," he replied firmly. "And it's Ethan, please." "Ethan," she repeated softly, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. "Thank you for your kindness tonight." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. The music from the social hall drifted out to them, a gentle melody that seemed to underscore the moment. "Would you like to try that dance again?" Ethan asked, standing and offering his hand. "Out here, where it's just us and the stars." Cassidy hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd like that very much." Under the cottonwood tree, with the moonlight casting dappled shadows around them, they danced to the distant music. For Cassidy, It felt like stepping into a dream, one where hunger and loneliness didn't exist. For Ethan, it was the realization that something had been missing from his life, something he hadn't even known to seek. As spring turned to summer, Cassidy became a regular presence at the Double R Ranch. True to his word, Ethan had arranged for her to take on the mending work, riding into town each Monday to collect the torn shirts and pants, then returning on Friday to bring back the neatly repaired garments and collect new ones. Their conversations, initially hesitant and formal, gradually deepened. Ethan found himself looking forward to Fridays, making excuses to be the one to meet with Cassidy rather than sending one of the hands. Sometimes he would bring her wildflowers or a book from his small collection, delighting in her surprised pleasure at these simple gifts. Cassidy, for her part, began to flourish. Regular meals and honest work had brought color to her cheeks and a sparkle to her eyes. Mrs. Miller noticed the change and teased her gently about the handsome foreman who seemed to find so many errands in town these days. One Friday in late July, Ethan arrived with a different proposition. "The ranch is hosting a barbecue on Sunday," he explained as Cassidy handed over the mended clothes. "The whole town's invited. I was hoping you might come." "A barbecue?" Cassidy repeated, trying to hide her excitement. She had heard about the Double R's famous summer gatherings, but had never attended one. "It's nothing fancy, just beef, beans, and Mrs. Garcia's peach cobbler," Ethan said with a smile. "But I thought you might enjoy it, and I could show you the ranch properly." "I'd like that," she replied, her voice soft but sure. Sunday dawned clear and hot, typical for late July in the territory. Cassidy wore her best dress, the blue one from the spring social, now enhanced with new lace she had traded some mending work for. Mrs. Miller insisted on lending her a straw hat with a ribbon that matched the dress. "You look lovely, dear," the older woman said, adjusting the hat. "That young man won't know what hit him." Cassidy blushed. "It's not like that between us." Mrs. Miller raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it? He rides into town every week when any ranch hand could do the same errand. And you spend all Thursday evenings making sure his shirts are pressed just so." Unable to deny it, Cassidy simply smiled and thanked her employer for the hat. The Double R Ranch sprawled across rolling hills 15 miles outside of town. Cassidy rode out in Mr. Henderson's wagon along with several other townspeople, her stomach fluttering with anticipation that had nothing to do with hunger. The ranch house was larger than she expected, a two-story structure of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Tables had been set up under a grove of cottonwoods, and the smell of roasting beef filled the air. Children ran about playing tag while adults gathered in small groups, drinking lemonade and catching up on news. Ethan spotted her the moment the wagon arrived. He excused himself from a conversation with the ranch owner and strode toward her, his usual serious expression replaced by an unrestrained smile. "You came," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "I said I would," she replied, suddenly shy under his intent gaze. Ethan took her hand and tucked it into the crook of his arm. "Come meet the boss. He's been curious about the woman who can actually make Cowboy's clothes last more than a month." The afternoon passed in a pleasant blur. Cassidy met Mr. Reeves, the owner of the Double R, along with his wife and their 3 children. Mrs. Reeves, a friendly woman originally from St. Louis, took an immediate liking to Cassidy and insisted she sit with them for the meal. "Ethan tells me you're quite the seamstress, Mrs. Reeves said as they ate. "I've been looking for someone to help with the children's clothes. They grow so fast, and I'm hopeless with a needle." "I'd be happy to help," Cassidy offered, glancing at Ethan, who was deep in conversation with Mr. Reeves about cattle breeding. After the meal, while most guests relaxed in the shade digesting their food, Ethan approached Cassidy. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch?" They walked together past the bunkhouse, the barn, and the corrals where several horses gazed at them with mild interest. Ethan pointed out the new windmill that had been his project over the winter and the apple orchard he had planted 2 years earlier. "The trees are still young, but Mrs. Garcia says we might get our first small harvest this fall," he explained, his pride evident. "You've built something wonderful here," Cassidy observed. Ethan shrugged. "It's Mr. Reeves's ranch. I just help run it." "But you care for it as if it were your own," she said. "That makes all the difference." He looked at her with surprise. and used to having his efforts so clearly seen and appreciated. They continued walking until they reached a small rise overlooking a creek that cut through the property. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, making the water sparkle like scattered gems. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Ethan admitted, gesturing for her to sit on a flat rock. "Sometimes I come here just to think." "I can see why," Cassidy replied, taking in the peaceful scene. "It reminds me a little of the creek behind our farm in Missouri. My father used to take me fishing there." "You miss them, your parents," Ethan said. "It wasn't a question." "Every day," she nodded. "But it gets easier somehow. Not because the loss is any less, but because I've learned to carry it differently." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "My father died thinking I was wasting my life working someone else's land. He wanted me to stake a claim somewhere, build my own ranch from nothing like he did." "And is that what you want?" Cassidy asked gently. "I used to think so," he replied, plucking a stem of grass and twirling it between his fingers. "Now I'm not so sure. The Reeveses treat me like family. The men respect me. And I've put so much of myself into this place." He trailed off, then added more softly, "But lately I've been thinking there might be something more I want." Their eyes met, and Cassidy felt her breath catch at the emotion she saw in his gaze. Before either could speak, however, a shout from the direction of the ranch house broke the moment. "Ethan, got visitors," called one of the hands. With a sigh, Ethan stood and offered Cassidy his hand. "Duty calls." But this conversation isn't finished. As summer faded into autumn, Cassidy found herself spending more time at the Double R Mrs. Reeves had indeed hired her to sew for the children, and her visits often coincided with Ethan's rare free moments. They would walk together, sometimes talking for hours, other times content in shared silence. In town, rumors circulated about the foreman and the seamstress, but Cassidy paid them little mind. What was growing between her and Ethan felt too precious, too private to be fodder for gossip. October brought an early cold snap and the town's harvest festival. The social hall was once again decorated, this time with autumn leaves and pumpkins. Cassidy wore a new dress. She had made herself a deep russet color that matched the changing leaves. She arrived with Mrs. Miller, her heart skipping when she immediately spotted Ethan waiting near the entrance. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a new shirt she recognized as one she had made for him as a surprise. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she reached him. "Thank you," she replied, noting how his eyes seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. "You look quite handsome yourself." The evening was filled with dancing, but unlike the spring social, Cassidy had no fear of fainting. Her life had transformed in the months since that night. She now had steady work, good food, and most importantly, Ethan's steadfast presence. As the evening wound down, Ethan led her outside to the same bench where he had brought her bread that fateful night. "Do you remember the first time we were here?" he asked, his voice low. Cassidy smiled. "How could I forget? I was mortified at the time, but now I think it might have been the luckiest moment of my life." "Mine too," Ethan agreed, taking her hand. "Cassidy, I've been thinking a lot about what my father said before he died about making my own way. And he was right, but not in the way he meant." He turned to face her fully, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "The ranch is offering me a partnership. Mr. Reeves wants to step back, spend more time with his family. He's offering me a quarter share now, with the possibility of more in the future." "Ethan, that's wonderful," Cassidy exclaimed. "You've earned it, truly." "It is wonderful," he agreed, "but incomplete." He took a deep breath. "Cassidy, these past months knowing you have been the happiest of my life. You see me in a way no one else ever has, not just what I do, but who I am." Her heart began to race as he continued. "I don't want a future at the ranch or anywhere else unless you're sharing it with me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring with a modest pearl. "This was my mother's. I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Cassidy Porter, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Cassidy's eyes as joy unlike anything she had ever known welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Ethan, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently in his hands. Their first kiss was tender, a promise of the life they would build together. The wedding took place on a crisp November day at the small church in Copper Creek. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with the ranch hands and the Reeves family. Mrs. Miller wept openly as she watched Cassidy walk down the aisle in a cream-colored dress she had lovingly created with her own hands. Ethan waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving Cassidy as she approached. When they exchanged vows, his voice rang clear and confident through the church. I, Ethan Abernathy, take you, Cassidy Porter, to be my lawfully wedded wife. The reception was held at the Double R, with tables set up in the same grove where the summer barbecue had taken place. Though the trees were now bare, the scene was no less beautiful, with lanterns hanging from the branches and a fiddler playing cheerful tunes. Mrs. Abernathy, Ethan murmured as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. I like the sound of that. So do I, Cassidy replied, her happiness complete as she moved in the arms of the man who had once brought her bread when she was hungry and now offered her a lifetime of love. The years that followed were full of hard work and joy in equal measure. Ethan and Cassidy moved into a small house that had been built for them on the ranch property, not far from his favorite spot by the creek. Under their care, it became a warm and inviting home, with curtains Cassidy sewed and furniture Ethan crafted in the evenings. The partnership with Mr. Reeves flourished, and within 5 years, Ethan owned half the ranch. His innovative approaches to breeding and land management brought prosperity even during the drought years that plagued the territory. Cassidy's sewing business expanded beyond mending for cowboys. Women from as far as 50 miles away sought her skills for wedding dresses and special occasion garments. She taught several local girls the trade, including the Reeves' eldest daughter, finding satisfaction in passing on her knowledge. Their greatest joy, however, came with the birth of their children, first Emma in 1877, then Michael 2 years later, and finally little Sarah in 1881. Their home rang with laughter and occasional tears, the chaos of family life a blessing neither had dared hope for in their earlier lonely days. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan surprised Cassidy by taking her to the spot where he had proposed. A small table was set up by the creek, with a proper meal laid out much fancier than the bread and cheese he had brought her that first night. Happy anniversary, my love, he said, pulling out her chair. Cassidy smiled at the man who had transformed her life with a simple act of kindness. 10 years. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you were carrying me out of that dance. Best decision I ever made, Ethan replied, taking her hand across the table. His thumb brushed over the simple gold band that had joined her mother's pearl ring. Though I have to admit, I had no idea where it would lead. Didn't you? Cassidy teased. I seem to recall you bringing me bread with very determined purpose. Ethan laughed. Well, I knew I wanted to help you. I didn't know I was meeting the woman who would become the center of my world. They ate as the sun set over the creek, talking about their children, the ranch, and their hopes for the future. When they had finished, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. What's this? Cassidy asked, surprised. Open it, he encouraged. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of their 3 children on one side and one of Ethan on the other. It's beautiful, she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. Ethan moved to her side of the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Cassidy, 10 years ago you fainted from hunger at a dance, and I carried you outside and brought you bread. It was the beginning of our story, but nowhere near the best part. He brushed a tear from her cheek. The best parts have been watching you with our children, building our home together, seeing you grow stronger and happier each year. I fall more in love with you every day, and I wanted you to have something to remind you of that love when we're apart. Cassidy leaned down and kissed him softly. I've never needed reminders to know how much you love me, Ethan. You show me every day in 1,000 ways. He helped her fasten the locket around her neck, then pulled her to her feet. Dance with me. There's no music, she pointed out with a smile. We don't need any, he replied, drawing her into his arms. As they swayed together in the gathering twilight, Cassidy reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From hunger and loneliness to abundance and love, from strangers to husband and wife, parents, partners in every sense. Life in the West was never easy. There would always be droughts and hard winters, illness and setbacks, but facing them together made all the difference. The bread Ethan had offered her that night had satisfied her immediate hunger, but his love had nourished her soul in ways she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About bread," Cassidy replied with a soft laugh, "and how sometimes the smallest kindnesses can change the course of a life." Ethan pulled her closer, his cheek resting against her hair. "Our children will never know hunger," he promised. "Not for food, not for love." "No," Cassidy agreed, "they won't. That's the legacy we're building, more valuable than any ranch or business." As stars appeared in the darkening sky, they continued their dance, two people who had found in each other not just love, but home, the most precious destination on any frontier.